Next, I'm delighted to introduce two of my colleagues, Dr. Mustafa Qasim and Dr. Muhammad Da'as, to give us a talk in regards of the Plab pathway with tips and tricks on how to master it. They both graduated from the University of Jordan 2020 and successfully finished their exams during 2021. They will take us through a journey, starting with the English language requirement test and reaching to how COVID has impacted these exams and all the obstacles faced nowadays. Doctors, can you please join us?
Thank you, Aya, for that wonderful introduction. Just allow me a few seconds. Let me share my screen, please. All right. So hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Mustafa. I'm a junior doctor from Jordan, and I've had the pleasure to be a part of Gyne Fellow for about a year now. I'm absolutely honored to have the opportunity to speak here at this platform. I'm going to present you with an overview of the Plab pathway and a little synopsis of my personal experience with this path. So first of all, what is the Plab pathway? So the Plab is a pathway that many IMGs choose to take to be qualified for practice inside of the UK. Candidates for this particular path are international medical graduates who have qualified outside of the UK and do not hold a relevant European qualification, meaning they do not hold a medical qualification that has been awarded in the European Economic Area or in Switzerland. The Plab, as a definition, stands for the Professional and Linguistic Assessment Board and is a set of two examinations that have been designed to test whether candidates are competent and with the relevant knowledge and skills that are needed to practice medicine in the UK. It aims to assess whether the candidate is as appropriately qualified as is a doctor who is about to start their second year of foundation program training in the UK. In other words, the level of an FY2, which is a rather junior position. Now, this has its own benefits as well as potential drawbacks, and we're going to talk about them in more details shortly. The two exams that comprise the Plab are the Plab 1, which is a multiple choice exam in clinical science, and the Plab 2, which is a practical exam styled as OSCE stations. In order to get the full registration with the GMC through this pathway, which is the General Medical Council and the body that maintains the official register of medical practitioners in the UK, in order to get the license to practice medicine in the UK, you need to pass in both examinations. Now, before you can even sit for the first Plab exam, you need to set up a GMC account, provide proof of your medical qualification, as well as your knowledge of the English language. The GMC has a list of the medical schools whose qualifications are accepted, and you need to check whether your medical school is one of these accredited schools or not. There's also the point that the qualifications needs to have already been issued before you can even sit for the Plab, meaning unlike the USMLE, you cannot sit for any part of the Plab unless you have already graduated from med school. As for the English language proficiency, in most cases, you do need to take another exam in order to prove your knowledge in the language. For the longest time, there was only one option, which was the Ielts, but the GMC has recently started to accept the OET, an Australian examination as well. And we will talk about each of those two options in more details across the next few slides. Now, either English exam is only valid for 2 years from the day of the exam, and you do need to provide proof of your English language proficiency on 2 separate incidences, one at the time of studying for the Plab 1 and one when you're applying for registration with the GMC with a license to practice. The certificate of the English language exam must be valid on the day that you sit for the Plab 1 test and when the GMC approves your application for registration. Now, like I said, the results of the English language tests are generally only valid for 2 years, even though this might change a little bit and vary according to the COVID regulations. However, generally speaking, it is only valid for 2 years from the day of the exam, but you don't have to have graduated from medical school in order to sit for either of those English language exams. It is very important to time your exams well. You don't want to run into a situation where you have to resit your English test simply because your test validity has expired. Most people, though, are able to sit for the Plab 1 and get their full GMC registration on one sitting. Now, let's start by talking about the Ielts exam. Now, this exam is in 4 sections: the listening, the reading, the writing, and the speaking. The test report form provides you with an overall balance score as well as an individual balance score for each of the 4 sections. In order for the GMC to accept your Ielts, there are a few criteria that need to be met. First of all, you need to have taken the academic version of the test. You need to get a score of at least 7.0 in each testing area and an overall score of at least 7.5. You need to have gotten your scores in the same test, and you need to have gotten these scores in the most recent sitting of the test. As for the OET, it is similar to the Ielts in the fact that it has also 4 sections, which are even the same sections that the Ielts has: the listening, the reading, the writing, and the speaking. There is a score for each section of the exam, but there isn't one for the overall examination. For the GMC to accept your OET as adequate evidence, it needs to follow the certain criteria below. You need to have taken the medicine version of the test. You need to have gotten at least a grade B in each testing area, which equates to about 350. You need to have got these grades in the same test, and you need to have obtained the grades in the most recent sitting of the test as well. Now, this raises the question of which is a better choice, OET or Ielts. Now, the trend amongst a lot of IMGs has been to prefer the OET over the Ielts, and this may be because of a couple of reasons. The OET has been designed since it was created as an exam to test English language in a healthcare setting. All 4 sections of the exam are based on clinical scenarios that are frequently encountered in a healthcare setting. Therefore, many candidates find that familiar and a little bit comforting. Rather than having to write about whether you agree with overpopulation being the most serious threat to the environment or not, which is an actual question that came up on one of the Ielts, you're asked to refer a patient to secondary care through a letter, or even explain to a patient their new diagnosis. You're not expected to demonstrate any clinical knowledge in this exam, and all the medical information that you need will be provided for you. It is simply that it is a much more familiar setting for a doctor, and the level of comfort or confidence that comes with that may be why it is a little bit easier to get the passing grade in an OET than it is in an Ielts. Now, the OET does have some undersides as well. It is not run in all countries, contrary to the Ielts, which is held by the British Council and therefore almost run in all of the countries. It is also more expensive than the Ielts is. Now, I've had the opportunity to sit for both exams. I did the Ielts when I was preparing for my elective, and I did the OET for the Plab 1 and the GMC registration. I prepared for about the same period of time for each. And even though it might be easier to get that 350 or B in an OET than it is to get that 7 in an Ielts, I still believe that it may be easier to get higher grades in the Ielts compared to the OET. From my experience, I think that with the proper preparation, it would be easier to get a 7.5 across all bands than it is to get that 450 across all bands, which are the grades that you need to get in order to qualify for a standalone FY2 position, which is usually the position that a lot of IMGs try to aim to get at when they get to the UK. So the choice of OET versus Ielts may be a bit more individualized than what initially people might assume. It depends a lot on your initial baseline English language abilities and also the purpose that you're taking the test for. It's easier to pass an OET, but it's easier to get into the higher grades with an Ielts if you have practiced enough and if you're comfortable enough. Now, after proving your English language proficiency, you can finally book a Plab 1 seat. Now, this exam tests your ability to apply your medical knowledge for the care of patients. It does not test how well you can remember and recite facts. The exam covers the common, important, acute conditions seen by trainees entering the second year of foundation program, as well as the management of long-term conditions seen in primary care. The point is that, again, this exam is at the level of a very junior doctor. Therefore, it is going to be general and will cover up a lot of different topics. Nonetheless, they all will be at a level that a primary physician can comfortably handle. Plab 1 is a written exam. It's made up of 180 multiple choice questions, which you must complete within 3 hours. Each starts with a short scenario, followed by the question, and you need to choose the right answer out of 5 possible options that have been given to you. The exam tests only clinical science and does not focus at all on the basic sciences. Generally speaking, the majority of the questions in any one exam are from medicine, But there are a few questions that come up from surgery, pediatrics, OBGYN, psychiatry, ophthalmology, ENT, ethics. There is a category that caters to pharmacology, but it is much more oriented on the clinical application of the drugs and the protocols for management of different pathologies, as opposed to detailed mechanisms of actions or pathophysiology. That being said, the focus of the PLAB 1 does vary from one session to another. Now, some candidates have sat for exams that were much more involved in ethics, while candidates from a different session felt that the focus was majorly on pharmacology. For that reason, our advice is to study all the categories and distribute effort fairly across all of them. Focus on medicine nonetheless, because in most cases, and generally speaking, it is the bulk of the exam, but do not neglect any category, even if you're pressed for time. I only had 1 month to prepare, and honestly, if you're able to provide the PLAB 1 with a dedicated study period, a month would be more than enough to comfortably pass the test. Ideally, though, we do recommend at least 2 months, just so that you're more relaxed in your preparation and you can give each category its fair share of efforts. The PLAB 1 exam is held 4 times in a year in a number of different locations around the world. Now, this has the added benefit of giving you a little bit of flexibility when booking for the venue, given the travel restrictions that have been making everything a little bit more difficult recently. All exam places are limited and they are in high demand. It is therefore very important to be aware of the times of these exams and the closing dates, the dates beyond which you cannot book for a certain venue or a sitting, and then making the necessary arrangements accordingly. You should prepare very well for this exam. You should dedicate enough time and effort for it. It is a relatively easy exam, but you don't know when you might be able to sit for another session if you're unfortunately not lucky enough on your first attempt, especially given the high demand at the moment. The pass grade of the PLAB 1 is determined on the overall candidate's performance in any one session, meaning that the average plays a huge role in determining that pass grade. It usually still hovers around the 60% mark, but that may change slightly from one session to another. There are a number of resources that people usually choose to use to prepare for the part 1 of the PLAB. The blueprint is a guide to what the exam covers and can therefore help you to prepare. It sets out the knowledge, the skills, and the behaviors that you are expected to demonstrate in the exam. All the topics and the skills needed to pass are covered up in the blueprint. Now, since the aim of the PLAB is to assess the abilities of international medical graduates and how they compare to UK qualified doctors, using the foundation program curriculum as guidance to the key skills and the possible competencies that are expected from you might be very useful as well. The good clinical practice is the GMC's core guidance, which all doctors registered with the GMC and licensed to practice medicine in the UK must follow. You will be expected to demonstrate the values and the behaviors that are outlined in the good medical practice inside of your PLAB examination, as well as while practicing inside the UK. With all said, most people rely heavily on online question banks during their preparation for the PLAB 1. There are a lot of them out there, and they can be very useful, honestly. On average, they do carry around 2,000 of the highest yield questions, and they are likely to come in the test, with an explanation following each question. They can help get you used to the style of the questions that comes up in the PLAB. Now, like I said before, the PLAB 1 is a generally easy exam, and it doesn't need a huge amount of preparation. The knowledge that we already have from medical school is in most cases more than enough to answer most of the questions comfortably. What remains is simply orienting yourself to the UK guidelines in managing common conditions, reading up on the ethics from the good clinical practice, and simply familiarizing yourself with the style of questions in this test. And you should be ready for the PLAB 1. Now, after you're done with the PLAB 1, there's this huge other journey of getting into the PLAB 2. And I'm going to yield the floor now to my colleague and my friend and my PLAB 2 study partner, Mohammed Das, and he's going to take you through what happens after you're done with the PLAB 1.
Thank you, Mustafa. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Mohammed Das. I'm a junior doctor from Jordan as well. I'm a colleague for Mustafa, and we were through this journey together. And he was actually my study partner through the whole journey during Plab 1 and Plab 2 as well. We were actually roommates in Plab 2 during the quarantine and all the exam preparation. And we were in the exam venue, the same venue, and almost behind each other in the exam process. Let me share my screen. All right. I would gladly love to talk about some tips and tricks for Plab pathways, specifically the Plab 2. As a start, my colleague Mustafa has mentioned about the OET and the Ielts exam and the Plab 1 as well. It seems like it's a long journey. It seems like it's a difficult journey. It's a lot of exams to take, a lot of requirements, a lot of criteria. However, believe me, all of these exams will just help the person, will help you to reach this Plab 2 exam and be well prepared for it. It will help you. The English test will give you the basic English needs to run a smooth conversation with a patient inside a clinic. And the Plab 1 will give you a great background for the UK system, and it will make you more involved in the UK system and how to practice medicine in UK. As a start, let me talk a bit about the Plab 2. What is Plab 2? So Plab 2 is a clinical scenarios. It's a multiple stations, and every stations reflect a real life setting, a real life situation where you have a patient and this patient has a complaint. You have to talk to the patient, address their concerns, and give them a decent management. How many stations are inside the exam? Normally, there will be 18 stations and 2 extra stations for rest. And so in total, there is 20 stations. It's almost every station is 8 minutes. And so in total, it will be up to 3.5 hours. Due to COVID restrictions and COVID-19, it was 2 stations were cut and loose, and so the total stations are actually 16 stations now. And in order to pass them, you need to pass 10 stations. We'll talk about this in a bit. Now, this exam is held in Manchester, UK. Unfortunately, it's not like Plab 1. Plab 1 has multiple venues around the world, and so it might be an easier option for international graduates. However, for Plab 2, you need to travel to UK and to do the exam in the GMC building in Manchester. Gladly, now there is 2 venues for GMC in Manchester, and so this increased the numbers for applicants. So there are more applicants that can apply for the exam. This exam is run throughout the year, so it's more flexible than Plab 1. Plab 1 has only 4 slots during the year. However, Plab 2 is run almost 3 up to 4 days a week, and so someone can find a slot more easier than Plab 1. So speaking of Plab 2 stations, every station has a passing criteria. And in order to pass the station, you will be assessed using 3 domains. The first domain is your data gathering skills, your history taking skills, your assessment, and reaching a decent diagnosis, a correct diagnosis. However, if you did not find, or if you did not reach the diagnosis, the correct diagnosis, don't give a wrong diagnosis. This is wrong. As a doctor, you can't give a patient a wrong diagnosis. Alternatively, you can just say we have some other possibilities we need to rule out, and so work on this. And the second domain is your management skills and how you reach a good management plan for your patient, where they are satisfied by this management plan. You need to manage the patient, not the disease. And this will reflect on your marking. And this might actually give you high marks if you manage the patients, even if someone did not reach a diagnosis. Now, the third domain is the interpersonal skills. And this is a full domain that someone needs to you need to perform it during the exam. There is no specific time to do your interpersonal skills. It's just something you have to do during the whole session, during the whole station. So the total marking is out of 12. Every domain is 4 marks. And so you will be graded up to 12 points for each station. And in order to pass the PLAB 2 exam, you have 2 criteria and 2 requirements to do. You need to pass 10 out of 16 stations. And the other criteria, you need to get above the minimal passing score. Now, how do they calculate the minimal passing score? It depends. Every venue has its own stations. And so your minimum score or the passing score will be determined according to the candidates that are examining with you. So in total, the passing score will be an average for 18 candidates who underwent through all of the stations. And so it's fair for this exam. Now, before preparing for PLAB 2, everyone has this question: how much time do I need to prepare for PLAB 2? Now, this differs. Why are me and my colleague Mustafa are presenting our experience in PLAB 2? Because honestly, we represent the 2 extreme ways for studying a PLAB 2. We both had a short notice to study for PLAB 2. It was 1 month. And due to COVID, we did not find any booking later than this. And so we had to book our exam and we had 1 month to prepare. And so before preparing for your PLAB 2, before setting your own schedule, and before determining how much time do I need for my PLAB 2 preparations, you need to be familiar with some basic skills. Every person has their own unique skills, have their own unique features, and so work on them. It's not like an MCQ exam. It's not like PLAB 1, where if you study better, if you study harder, you will get a higher mark. In PLAB 2, it's a real scenario. You will deal with patients, and the examiner will give you the mark based on yourself, based on your features and your skills. And before getting into the exam, the head of the GMC or the head of PLAB 2 examiners, he visited us, he passed by, and he started telling us some stories. Honestly, I was so stressed and I did not hear a single word. However, I just remember him saying, in the exam, just be yourself. Everyone has their unique features. And so if you showed us your true self and that you are capable of running a smooth conversation and practice medicine in a safe way and in a decent way, you will pass. You don't have to put a mask other than yourself. Just be yourself and work on your skills. So before preparing the PLAB 2, look at your English skills. You don't need some fancy words to use inside a conversation. As an international graduate, if you're not fluent in English or English was not your mother tongue, just practice simple English. Try to give the patient what they need using simple sentences. Don't make it more complex. Don't use some fancy words. Simple English, just illustrate whatever you learn in medical school to a patient in simple, pure English. Now, you can work on your IP skills. This is something like you have to practice more. You have to incorporate within your practice. And how do you practice on your IP skills? It just comes with time. You need to practice and practice in front of a person that can actually give you comments. Interpersonal skills is a huge entity. It's actually one of the reasons why I have passed my PLAB 2 exam. And so I advise everyone to work on their interpersonal skills inside the station and while they are practicing. Have confidence. Confidence is one of the golden keys to pass the exam. If you went inside the station and you were stressed, you're not going to make it. So be confident. You're a doctor. You have graduated medical school. You have passed Lab 1. And so you are more than competent. You are more than ready to pass and ace Lab 2 exam. Everyone has the basic medical knowledge. Everyone has a decent medical knowledge. And so don't be afraid to be confident. Don't be afraid to run a smooth conversation inside a clinic. You need to have a sense of time. You need to work on time management. The exam is only 8 minutes. It seems a lot of time, however, it's not. Believe me, inside the station, it's not enough to speak 8 minutes and tell everything to the patient. And so you need to practice more in order what to say and what not to say, what is important to tell the patient and what is not. This is an exam after all. The body language, this includes your facial expressions. How do you react with the patient? Be sympathetic, be empathic, talk to the patient, address their concerns, react with what they say. If they are telling you a sad event, just be compassionate with them. Be nice to the patients and give them a decent conversation and a good reaction. Your acting skills. Now, not everyone is good with acting. However, don't show the examiner that you are actually acting, all right? And that's why you have to be yourself. You can try to work on how to act inside an exam. If you're not good with facial expressions, try to focus more on how to show facial expressions in terms of if someone was happy, if someone was sad, if you were going to break some bad news. Before practicing any station, you have to build up some strategies. Whenever you're practicing for Lab 2, whenever you're practicing every station, you have to have your own strategies. How to run this conversation, how to speak to a patient. Don't be robotic, don't be scripted. The examiners are highly trained, they are very professional, and they do the exam every day, and they see hundreds of candidates every day. And so they know if you are being scripted or if you are just being robotic. Just be yourself, have your own strategies, work on the right strategy, what to say, what to ask, and how to give the patient the diagnosis and the management plan. Another domain of the Plab 2 and other stations is clinical skills. These clinical skills you have to practice. You can practice it either inside your country, in a hospital, or if you don't have time or if you can't have the right resources to practice these clinical skills, you can register in an academy and they will give you an access and the ability to practice and the clinical skills you need. Arterial blood sampling, cannula insertion, speculum examination, and a lot of other clinical skills. Now, some tips for Plab 2, some further tips for Plab 2. All these stations must be patient-centered. Now, these are the examiners, and the patients inside the exam are actors. They are experienced actors. And so they know that they are in an exam. They won't tell you a long story. They won't give you misleading information. And so give them time to talk, to speak, to express themselves and their concerns. And you have to address everything they speak. Everything they told you inside the station, you have to address it. And that's how you can pass the Plab 2 exam. We have already spoken about the time management. You have only 8 minutes. So with time, you can have the sense, with practice, you can have the sense of time, and you can know when to stop asking history and start moving to the other domain. Practice is a crucial part. And actually, It's the most important thing in the whole PLAB 2. Even if you read a lot of books, even if you have a lot of medical knowledge, if you studied every single station in PLAB 2, every single complaint, you have to practice. You have to practice a lot, like a lot. Practice is what will make a difference inside the PLAB 2. Because you don't want to have your first encounter with the station inside the exam. You have to practice, and you have to practice. All right, so after the exam, I want to tell you a bit about the COVID-19 effect, and my colleague, Dr. Faiza, will speak thoroughly about the COVID-19 effects on the whole training in UK. However, what we have encountered this year due to COVID, a lot of my colleagues faced cancellations to their exam. Imagine if you were planning to have a PLAB 1 exam in February and it was just canceled. So then you have to wait another 3 months to find or to book another exam in May. And imagine if it was canceled again, and then you have half a year. Half a year was wasted because of cancellations due to COVID exams. And recently, one of my colleagues just traveled to a country, and one day before the exam, it was canceled because of COVID restriction. Another thing is travel restrictions. In order to reach UK, in this period, there was a lot of red list countries, and so a lot of candidates had to cancel their exams because they couldn't travel from country A to UK as it was a red list country. Otherwise, as personally, it was hard for me to book a plane ticket for UK because most of the transit were through a red list country. And so I had to book a really expensive direct plane from Amman, Jordan to London. And that was the only choice I had. COVID has affected the structure of PLAB 2 exam. At first, the candidates, the numbers of slots were cut in half. And this made it very hard for any person or any candidate to book a slot in COVID in PLAB 2 test. And till now, people find it difficult to book a test and to find a date to attend this test. COVID has affected, and it surely put an extra cost for all of the UK journey. Shortly, I want to speak about the expenses through this test. Now, the OET test costs around £300, plus minus the travel expenses. Some countries do not have OET venue, and so you have to travel abroad, travel to a neighboring country or whatever country that has a OET venue. The PLAB 1 and PLAB 2 tests are in total, like it's almost £1,000 or £1,100. However, it's still cheap than any other option compared to US and the USMLE. And now there is always an add-ons. For PLAB 2, you have to travel to UK, and so there is an additional cost of 1 or 2 months of staying in UK. And for accommodation and transportation, commuting. And some people find it, some people to register in an academy, and the fees for some of the PLAB 2 academies are very high. It's around £600 as well. And so in total, you have to pay a not very large amount of money, but like quite decent amount of money. And believe me, it's worth it. It's totally worth it. I'm still waiting to get an opportunity to find a job in UK, and so we'll wait and see what happens. Thank you, everyone. I am honored to present these lectures. If you have any questions, I am more than happy to answer them at the end of the lecture.